Hello, and welcome along to Storytime with Uncle Gravy. And as you may or may not know by now, or you probably will know by now, otherwise you wouldn't have found this channel and you wouldn't be watching. I'm waffling already. It's Sunday. I'm tired. We're reading The Rustles by me. I say we're reading. I'm reading it. You're listening. I'm still waffling. Shall I just carry on? I'll carry on with the story. I've got the story in my hand. I'm going to carry on with the story. Here it comes. Some people say that good things happen to good people. Well, if that is true, then Ash was just about to be rewarded for always being helpful and positive. When the tunnel ran out, Ash simply plopped out of the end and fell to the ground below. And luckily for Ash and all the other Rustles, Hollie wasn't very tall compared to the other giants, so although it felt to Ash like a fall from the tallest tree, the combination of leafy plants and long grasses meant that after a few fluffy bounces, Ash was on the ground, very dazed, very confused, but alive. Within a minute, Jake and Hollie had put the tent pole into position to form the roof, successfully joining the two ends together. Ash didn't know it, but things could have been a lot worse, as there would have been no escape from that position if the pole had been fixed in place while Ash was still inside it. As Hollie and Jake busied themselves around the tent frame, draping the outer cover over it and then hammering in the tent pegs, Ash took a look around too, and realised that everything had suddenly become very different. The strange thing, though, was that a lot of the things felt strangely familiar too. Ash knew that this was a garden land, just like the one that provided Ash with everything that was needed every day. There was tall grass and short grass, dandelions growing all round, seeds and bits of plant on the floor. There were tiny seedlings too, poking through the damp soil and preparing for battle with the other young plants to get to the light the next day. The light that was shining in the sky now, though, looked exactly like the moon that made Bernie have funny dreams. And this only caused more questions. Crouched in the grass and not wanting to make a sound, Ash could only try to think. I slept and I dreamed about flying and rising. I woke but still rose, and this view is surprising. I can't see a pond, but I can see the moon. There's no Chris or Bernie, and they'll miss me soon. I've napped, but I'm sleepy. I'm tangled and bruised. This view is quite creepy, and I'm feeling confused. I want my old snail shell, the pond, and my friends. I want my own garden, with nice odds and ends. Little did Ash know, but Bernie and Chris had actually got caught up in the drama and had witnessed the pole, with Ash inside it, being passed over the fence to Hollie. Of course, they had no idea that Ash was actually inside it, clinging on for dear life. At the moment that the pole was passed over the fence, they had just been counting their lucky stars that they hadn't been squashed by Hollie's dad. He was usually very neat and tidy in the garden, and liked things to be trimmed, pruned, and in good shape, which meant that work was usually carried out while standing on the gravelly path, or done carefully with long shears and clippers. Completely out of character for him, though, he had picked up something from the grass, answered the smaller giant on the other side of the fence while laughing, then simply dashed speedily through the plants to get to the fence. This unexpected action meant that Bernie and Chris both had to run and dive out of the way, as leaves, twigs, seeds and berries all rained down from a great height. A tiny twig may not look like much to you, but just imagine being the size of a Russell, then looking up and seeing one coming crashing down from above. The sky was now nearly totally dark, but was lit by a large and glowing moon, and across the two gardens, everything was in place for an amazing night. The parents had cleared away the last of the barbecue things, but had left the lid open to show a red and orange glow. Jake and Hollie were inside the tent, unrolling mats and sleeping bags. Ash was in the garden with them, completely lost and feeling as panicky as it was possible for a Russell to feel. Bernie and Chris were in their usual part of the garden, but not yet aware that they had just watched as their friend was passed over the impossibly tall fence that divided the gardens. The parents checked the tent one final time, and then they all went inside to play cards and eat sweets. After rolling out sleeping bags, Hollie and Jake reached for their small backpacks at the same time. The tent was up. They had somewhere to sleep, and the grown-ups were gone. So now it was time to check their assortment of stuff and things, which they had assembled for the first part of their great nighttime science experiment. Hollie smiled as she saw Jake lift a brand new notebook out of his backpack. It was one of those notebooks with the curly wire that went down one side, and there was a new pen tucked inside the curls, so he had everything in place if he needed to record something quickly. They both had a torch to use too, but Hollie had managed to persuade her parents to let her use the new flashlight that her mum had bought for nighttime field trips with students. It was so powerful that it was possible to actually shine a beam of light up into the night sky and point at certain stars or planets, which to Hollie was almost impossibly cool. They knew it would probably be too strong for shining at rustling noises in the grass, but they both agreed it would probably be fun to play with at some point. Having been really keen to impress their parents with the planning of the research and getting good results from the experiment, Hollie and Jake had decided to keep a watch out together for the first hour and record any wildlife that they saw or could definitely identify from a noise. After that, they would take turns for 30 minutes each until they both became too tired or it just got too cold to be outside. They lay out another ground mat just outside the entrance to the tent, checked that they had their notebooks and pens ready, and then switched off the torches, although that didn't make a lot of difference to the lights in the garden, to be honest. Their parents had left the outside light on, but had promised to turn it off when they went to bed. After the initial rush to lay out sleeping bags and mats and check their recording equipment, Hollie and Jake now sat still, not making any sound, listening to all the evening noises around them. Ash was shivering already, but at that moment wasn't too sure if it was from feeling cold or from feeling scared. With a body covered in furry fluff, a Russell rarely got chilly, but there was hardly a cloud in the sky, and the moon's light was casting a naturally icy glow. Ash came out of the longer grass, looked up, shuddered again, and taking a look around, decided what to do for the best. As usual, the thoughts came along in a way that made them easier to remember and organise. Okay, so I'm not in my garden or land. My trip to the tunnel was not what I planned. It moved, I moved too, and though I am okay, I want to get home, nap, and then start a new day. This garden is sloping, and my one slopes too, so maybe not everything here is all new. The fence at the end looks like ours, it's the same, but there is a thing in the way. That's a shame. A strange pointed building, two giants outside. Shall I risk exploring? How can I decide? They seem to be listening and watching and waiting. Do they work at night too? This might get frustrating. It feels like I've not gone a long way from home, but it's quite far enough, and I feel quite alone. Ash sat down on what looked like a little ball, but was actually a new rhubarb plant which had come through the soil. The area where Ash had landed did have some familiar grasses in it, but it was also a bed that Jake's parents used for growing rhubarb, raspberries and blueberry plants. A ripe blueberry had been knocked from one of the plants during the fall from the tent pole and was a little distance away from the rhubarb seat. It wasn't something that Ash had seen before, but it looked like it should be good for eating, so very carefully and slowly Ash prodded it and found that the skin was slightly torn. This made it easy to scoop a bit of the flesh out, and when the juice burst in Ash's mouth, it produced the first smile of the evening. The decision was made to finish the whole berry, then do some more thinking and planning. "Did you hear that?" whispered Hollie. Jake nodded back at her, looking excited. It sounded like an owl. As they both switched on their torches to make a note of their first animal of the night, another call sounded out from the tall trees further down the road. "Yes," whispered Jake. then did an impression of the noise before confidently offering a name for the notebook. "Twit-twoo," he warbled. "That's the noise a tawny owl makes," and started to write the name in his notebook. "Actually," said Hollie, a little louder than a whisper, "it's actually 2 tawny owls. The male makes the woohoo sound and the female calls him a twit, but lots of people put them together by mistake. That's what my dad told me anyway." "Oh," said Jake, sounding a bit caught out, but making a scribbled edit to his recording anyway. Nearby, Ash had just heard the conversation, as a giant's whisper was still pretty loud to a rustle. "That small giant sounded like Chris. When it shared, it sounded quite bossy and over-prepared." Again, a small smile played across Ash's face, and whether it was the sugary juice from the blueberry or the bright light from the moon lighting the end of the garden, it felt like a good time to start on part 1 of a plan. If Ash was to be honest, there was only one part to the plan so far, but it felt like the right thing to do. This new place felt odd, but also felt like it was almost home too, in a peculiar way. The thing which Ash recognised as being the thing that looked most like home was the end of the garden, and the way that the fence panel was identical to the one in the Rustles garden. Reaching that might give some clues about his strange new world, and there seemed like no better time to start on the journey towards it than right there and then. A decision needed to be made though. Between Ash and the bottom of the garden was the tall pointy building with the giant still sitting outside it. If Ash went the shortest way to the fence, it would mean going under it or over it or to the side of it. The alternative was to walk across the whole lawn, which was neatly cut to a very short length, to the other side of the garden, then walk down to the fence. This route would avoid the giants, but would be at least 3 times as far, and would also mean Ash crossing an open patch of land under a lot of light. The bigger giants now had cleared away all their things and said their goodbyes, but the garden light was still on, so, with the moon shining down too, it really only left one choice. Ash had already been quite brave that evening, but the next journey would require new levels of skill and patience. A very loud noise suddenly made everything in the garden stop. It sounded like a shriek or a scream and was repeated several times, with a few seconds between each call. Jake and Hollie both looked at each other, reached for their notebooks, and wrote in the second entry for the night, "Urban Fox." They were both now really excited to be out in the environment at night with these larger animals. They often heard the foxes calling like this when they were lying in bed, so the noise was nothing new. But knowing they were now sharing the same space with them, away from the coziness of their duvets and their pillows, the glow of lights from the house through their doors and the clicks and creaks of the floorboards cooling was a good feeling. Jake confessed something to Hollie. "I asked my parents why the fox makes that noise at night, but they wouldn't tell me. Do you know, Hollie?" "Well, actually," and this time Hollie didn't seem quite as confident sharing information, "I know it is 2 foxes and not 1 fox, but Mum and Dad didn't tell me either. I know they know, but they wouldn't tell me, so it's probably something gross." There was a silence after that, as both children tried not to think of foxes doing gross things. It didn't work. Telling the children the truth would have probably been a better idea, as gaps left deliberately in information are often just filled by guesses, which frequently become much worse than the real story. The fox's screams seemed to quieten everything else in the garden, and for the next few minutes it seemed like all the wildlife was completely still. Hollie decided after a while that it would be a good time to show Jake how powerful the flashlight was, so she gave him a nudge, pointed to it, and then held it up facing the sky. With a click of the rubbery button on top, the flashlight burst into action, pointing a thin shaft of light straight up into the air. Jake was taken by surprise, as the light looked as though it actually went up to the stars. Hollie moved it around a little bit and pointed it in the direction of the moon, which is now higher in the sky and looked much smaller than it had when it came up over the hill. Clouds were drifting past it now too, and Hollie hoped that the other clouds that were gathering wouldn't get too big. The evening had been clear at the start, and their plan was to be outside the tent for as long as possible, so rain would certainly not be welcome tonight. As before, Hollie and Jake could not know that they had a very small audience, but the strong beam had certainly made Ash look up. What is that light shooting into the sky? How is it moving so fast? Tell me why. How do the giants produce their own light? Is this a big secret which happens at night? This garden's weird. There's too much going on. I hope I get home and I'm not here for long. I just need to get past the big pointy thing and see what the fence at the end will then bring. Ash set off, creeping carefully through the grass in the direction of the tent and the bottom of the garden. Although Rustles were perfectly happy moving around at night, this was because they were happy in their own small part of a big world, as it was one which they knew every tiny detail of. This new land made Ash nervous, and the feeling that everything was going to feel new was not a comfortable one at all. Even the slugs that were moving around seemed less friendly. The slugs in Ash's world were bigger than a Russell, completely black, and had never seemed that bothered about meeting any of them. The first slug that Ash came across, though, was brown, with a really bright orange foot, and it seemed to stretch on for a long, long way. Ash had been weaving along, parted some thick grass, and came face to face with one unexpectedly. Its head moved quickly, for a slug, and swung in Ash's direction. The size and speed of Ash, compared with the lumbering slugs, meant that it wasn't a dangerous encounter, and a quick change of direction, combined with the slug's lack of any speed, meant that apart from getting some slimy foot fur, Ash was safe and gone before the slug could do any damage. Hollie and Jake had turned the flashlight off now, and were now both lying down on their mats looking up at the night sky, trying to spot patterns in the stars. Hollie liked to try and make up new patterns in starry skies. Her mum and dad had shown her the main constellations, and it seemed that everyone could find the plough, or saucepan, as Hollie called it, but she often wondered why, with so many tiny pins of light in a clear sky, it was so hard to join the dots and make something new out of them. When she was younger, Hollie had wanted to be a postman, and then a scarecrow, but was now determined to become a scientist, like her parents. She thought it would be very cool if she could make sense of a new collection of stars one day, and create her own pattern in the sky to share with the world. As time passed, there weren't many new noises to investigate, and they both began to feel a little sleepy. But then the silence was broken, in a very exciting way. At first, there was a little snorting noise, and a rustle from near the end of the garden, and this was soon followed by another snort, and another, until it was clear that Hollie and Jake were hearing was more than one animal. Jake reached for his torch very slowly, but didn't dare turn it on yet, for fear of scaring away what they hoped was making the noise. The sound began to feel like it was getting closer to where they were, and new noises started to happen too. Whatever it was chewing very noisily on something. The sound was wet and crunchy, and was soon joined by more snuffling. And suddenly, the best thing that could have possibly happened. Only a couple of metres away from the entrance to the tent, a pointy nose poked out of the grass, sniffed the air, and then disappeared. And just seconds later, though, a hedgehog parted the grass and walked forward a little way before pausing again and snorting. As Hollie and Jake's eyes opened wider, the reason for the pause now became clear. Following the adult, 3 tiny hedgehog babies wobbled along together and stopped, forming a very cute semicircle around her. The babies were all each chewing on something, but with the torch not yet turned on yet, Hollie and Jake couldn't see the remains of the orange-footed slug, which their mum had met in the grass, a short time after Ash had. With excitement and curiosity mixing and making an irresistible spell, Jake looked at Hollie, who nodded back at him. Jake pointed the torch towards the hedgehog family, took a breath, and then flicked the switch. He quickly moved the light so they could see all of the animals, and the hedgehogs reacted by squealing and ran behind their mother. The adult hog didn't seem as shocked as her babies, though, and just sniffed the air coming from the direction of the torch. Slowly, and without fuss, she turned around and wandered back into the long grass. 2 of the 3 hoglets followed her immediately, but the last one, which looked smaller than the others, seemed to be completely frozen, and it was staring hard at something, and it was sniffing the air with intent. that's where we'll leave it today. A slightly longer one today because it's Sunday and we all need a longer story on a Sunday, especially if we're tired. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope to see you tomorrow, and I hope that you're all very, very well. And thanks for watching.